Along the only 16 years of life that I've lived, I have known several people who felt like they needed to hide who they are in order to be accepted by society. I have been friends with people who were too afraid to tell me something personal because of labels that I could place on them. I have been one of those people that judges themselves because they finally started believing in all the negative stigmas that they had been tuning out. I hope that someday, people will stop having to be scared of being discriminated because of who they are. Discrimination has to be one of the biggest problems our society has at the moment. It's gotten better if we compare it to how it was like 500 years ago, but we as a community still have a long way to go. Technically, there are two main types of discrimination, direct and indirect, but both are equally unfair. Direct discrimination is when a person is treated less favorably for one of their attributes. Currently, this is unlawful, so you can take action in the civil courts. However, this is not always an option, because sometimes it creates inconveniences that seem minor, but they hurt a person's self-esteem and self-confidence. Even though this is a good enough reason to demand change, you can't really sue someone for hurting your feelings. One of these cases happened to my mom while my family was living in Mexico. We needed health insurance, and so my father told the insurance broker that he should speak to my mom, since she was the one that took charge of the household duties. But the man refused, and said that he would only speak to the man of the house. When my mom heard of what had happened, she felt powerless, almost like she depended on a man because she wasn't perceived as capable of doing anything herself. All because an insurance broker was too ignorant to speak to a woman that was just taking care of her family. This affected my mom so much that even though it happened over 15 years ago, she still remembers it to this day. Indirect discrimination is when a requirement or practice seems fair because it applies to everyone equally, but upon closer inspection, some people are unfairly disadvantaged from it. My mom had to deal with indirect discrimination while my parents were settling their divorce. We live in Colombia, and Colombian law states that each parent must pay 50% of the children's expenses, like school and medical bills. This would seem fair at first glance, but since my mom got custody of my sister and I, she was disadvantaged from this seemingly fair law because not only did she have to work full-time, but she also had to take care of us while still paying 50% of our expenses, almost like the time that she spent on us wasn't taken into account. Luckily, we were old enough not to need permanent care, but in some families there are toddlers and even babies that need to be taken care of by whichever parent gets custody of them. This would mean that the parent would either have to work part-time if they wanted to spend more time with their children, therefore earn less money but still pay 50% of the children's expenses, or they could work full-time and not be able to see their children all day. The kinds of discrimination I've had to deal with while growing up all seem to be rooted from the same thing: labels. I would define these kinds of labels as words we humans like to stamp on people in order to feel at ease, by sorting everyone into categories, regardless of whether or not that person feels identified with the word that has been assigned to them. I used to judge and even discriminate people based on labels that they didn't even put on themselves. But it turns out that labels are completely useless, because whether you're labeling yourself or somebody else, it's only going to lead to criticism and opinions that are just based on unjustifiable assumptions. We need to start tolerating differences. No two people are exactly the same, which is why I can't understand why we as a species still have such a hard time accepting differences. Certain attributes just shouldn't be relevant when judging a person's character, because more often than not, that person has no control over them. If everyone thought this way and was able to open their mind, we would be able to live in a world where no one feels like they have to hide who they are just to fit in. Differences that make someone stand out from the rest will no longer be the most important part of that person's identity. We would be able to live in a world where your race, sex, gender, sexual orientation, religion, age, ethnicity, or otherwise would not affect the way that you are treated by society. Maybe then, we could finally start to work together towards a better future for everyone. I hope for a world without discrimination.